I was born in 1991. South Africa was painfully shedding its old skin and preparing to be born again as a democracy. With all the promise this transition held for the land's estranged children who had journeyed to foreign lands in search of liberation, safety, and refuge, my grandfather decided to distill his optimism into a name that would shape my identity. Buyane, he named me. Buyani ma-Afrika. A name that is a name, but also a calling. Unfortunately, as a child who struggled already with difference and its othering consequences, this name was not easy to love. It was uncommon. I didn't care much about the political significance. Instead, I wondered what my folks were thinking giving me such a different name, as opposed to the Sipos and the Siyabongas and the Sishes, whose multiple incarnations littered the corridors of my school each year. My difference didn't end at my name, though, as some of you might know. I looked different. I behaved different. I did not comply with what a boy or a girl was. I was neurodivergent. I was black. And within the first 7 years of life in this dimension, my parents departed. And in this world where children are not quite recognized in their fullness, I lost what felt like an essential qualifier to being secure in my identity as a child. I experienced quite viscerally the conditions of social death, a death from which I was to construct myself. From a young age then, I began to ask myself very big questions about the nature of life and identity. Who am I? Who am I if I am nobody's child, if I'm not like the others? What am I? What am I if I'm neither boy nor girl? Who am I if I exist in shame? In the world, in the minds of people, some of whom I loved? Who am I if I'm dead, invisible, criminal, black? Of course, people try to answer my question for me. Stabane, sisputi, kwala, mnyamane were some of the words I often heard, each imposing negative connotations onto the name and psyche of a child. I was not satisfied. So very quickly, the question shifted from who am I to who am I to become? I became a dreamer. The first dream was to leave that small town in KZN and come to Johannesburg, that city that was so infamous that I had heard so much about. To me, Johannesburg symbolized freedom and actualization, but in the same breath, it represented a mecca of moral decay in the eyes of villagers. While I too wanted to go to Johannesburg and become the unthinkable. Fortunately, I was born into a family that believed whoever I was becoming, so they supported my pursuits. At the age of 13, I packed my bags and went to commune with other dreamers at the National School of the Arts, where I pursued my dream of being a famous painter. While there, I discovered acting, and I loved it so much that I immediately switched majors. I went to the school office to get forms. I forged my aunt's signature. I auditioned, got accepted, and later informed her. I recognized the death this craft demanded. I was familiar with the sacred cartography of that dead place where I had to go to summon people I did not know. I was familiar with the act of wearing someone, becoming someone. It had been a survival tool for years, so I excelled. In the process of fetching these characters for the stage, I then encountered a few who did not want to leave when the curtains fell. They followed me home. Alter egos, they were called. They demanded transformation. And so I fell in love with fashion, fascinated by how it could crystallize the people who exist within us. I felt quite deeply the power it had on the spirits. And then as time went by, some of these characters began to demand their own worlds, where their narratives could unfold in timelines untethered to mine. So I became a writer. Performance didn't vacate the room, though. I wrote as the people. First, there was Unondindwa, who made her debut in a series of prose titled Nondindwa's Diary, Memoirs of a Taxi Rank Slut. Then there was Sally Matunzi. Then there was uScavenger, Ulova wasedubane. I was now walking into my 20s, very conscious of my positionality in the world. I was waking up to ideas like intersectionality, which taught me that I was not the only one who had to find their humanity in disrespectable conditions. In my writing, I became a home to the archetypes of the socially criminal. And then, one morning at 5 a.m. back in KZN, I woke up for my morning run. Determined, I put on my running shoes and hit the road. There was a sugarcane farm right next to my village that had a peaceful gravel road that wrapped itself around the hills like a serpent. That is the path I chose. Throughout that morning, there was a voice that kept saying to me, "Ungayi lapho. Do not go there." Now, I was already accustomed to hearing a lot of voices, but this one sounded real in a physical sense. The deeper I went into those bends, the louder the voice became, and the louder my resistance to it grew. I was reading Eckhart Tolle, and this sounded like one of those voices I just had to observe, release. So I continued. In the distance, the sound of dogs barking alarmed me, but that did not stop me until I was running along the fence of the house where those dogs were in, until I realized that the gate was not closed as it usually was, until I was on the ground fighting for my life against two giant hounds. Dusk seasoned the air as they ate chunks of my flesh. I felt my own death unfolding. My screams were futile. Nobody heard me. I was literally about to close my eyes and die when I opened my mouth one last time, releasing my final cry. That cry was laden with a presence I had never encountered before. The dogs released me peacefully as if they hadn't just tried to kill me. I limped back home with a calmness more terrifying than the events of that morning, leaving trails of blood on that swirling road, sugarcane leaves threatening to slice my wounds some more. A new voice had arrived, and along with the terror, it came with music. Music followed me everywhere from that moment onwards. I heard cries from that distant, dead place where I had gone to fetch that voice that saved me. And I knew I had to turn those cries into something. So I learned how to make music in secret over many years. I was not about to tell my family I was in the process of becoming something or someone else yet again. No. This felt different. It was too precious. I couldn't expose it to a frown of concern or any words of reason because I knew it had to be done regardless. So I bunked church so I could stay at home and record these voices, burying myself beneath blankets to blur the sound of chickens outside. And when I moved back to Johannesburg, I stayed up at night until the city was quiet enough for us to be. Us, along with all the other voices who dwelled in this city's underworld, reverberating through its hollowed out cavities. By the time I released my very first album 9 years later, this dead place that I had gone to many times in my life, the place I conceptualized from, where I pulled characters and their realities from, this place that called me ever so often, sometimes at life-threatening volumes. It began to feel less like a place that I visited occasionally. I lived there now. In fact, it began to feel less like a place and more like me. Through the sustained act of music making, I got to embody a space in which time exists in ways that we can't fathom materially. The space where ancient spirits exist alongside the futures that the songs promised. And then the dreams came, and I realized that these ancient spirits weren't just there for the music. They wanted to cement their place in my world through initiation, intwaso, and the rituals therein. And just like that, ingoma made umgoma out of me. So now I'm here, existing as all these things, all these people. My flesh is the intersection of many destinies. I carry histories in my blood. I am mother and father. As the seven-headed serpent, I am the seventh head, right in the middle, negotiating duality and multiplicity across dimensions with the sensuality my flesh affords me. I identify with this divine continuity. I identify with this all-creating space that shatters temporal captivity, the space we arrive at by drum, by ingoma, by death, where we exist in our wholeness. I identify with this black godly consciousness that has transformed my entire being. Finally, I have an answer for that 7-year-old child who so desperately wanted to know who he was in the world. So who am I? I am Isimakade, the one who has been forever, a god. No matter how much I change, I will always be. From this place, I have been able to conceptualize my being in ways that make me feel liberated. And I wonder what our world would become if we all knew this about us, if it became the gnosis that anchors our collective consciousness. How would amasiko ethu transform if their sole purpose was centered around sustaining this consciousness? Who would we become if we allowed the rigid framework we call isintu to evolve in ways that incubate all manifestations of Izimagate and not just the men? What would we teach at our schools? How would we teach it? Knowing very well the consciousness we are trying to nourish with wisdom, with memory. How would we approach the msamos that govern us at a national level? Parliament, legislation. Could we make our spiritual practices less of a curiosity and more of a technology, an order? As a philosophy, Izimagate asks that we reassess our very definition of being as abantu abamnyama and build around that. It says that this consciousness is the primary reality, and the imposed reality should occupy that obscure space that our spiritual selves were forced to occupy for centuries, along with the practices that sustained us. Izumagate is a philosophy of Black self-determination and agency. It asks that we decolonize our imaginations. It demands that we reclaim our psyches, to reject the notion that reality ends where we are told it ends, in this world that is designed to create realities that only sustain our captivity. I believe that in embodying this in our masses, We have the potential of building a world where the soul is free, free to be. Because in this current world, our being is relegated to a distant, dead place, calling us back. Buyani. Thank you.